Good morning, everyone. So we'll make a start because we have our Zoom participants waiting online. Okay, so we'll try that again. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the first National Integrity Summit hosted by Transparency International PNG with the support from the European Union. For those that have just joined us, my name is Ariane, and I lead the team at Transparency International PNG. So a few housekeeping rules before we start. For participants here at the venue, the toilets are on the right as you walk out, the first hallway on your right. If there is an emergency and we need to evacuate, please exit down the stairs and follow the instructions of the fire marshal. I also ask that all phones be put on silent. And I also would like to ask or seek your permission to take pictures. So we will be taking pictures throughout this event, throughout today. And we will have cameras from our Spider Tech crew, WK Photography, and of course TIPNG. If you would not like to be in any of the pictures, please let one of the TIPNG staff know. So we're all wearing this outfit, and we will make sure that you are not in any of the pictures today. For participants that are on Zoom, I welcome each and every one of you, and thank you for making the time to join us virtually for the opening session. A reminder that you are probably only registered for the first panel. There are 2 panels that will take place after this. So if you have not registered for the 2 panels, you have time to do so right now. So please feel free to do that. If you are posting about the summit on social media, please do tag our social media handles and use the hashtag PNG Integrity. A run-through of the program for today. So we will start with a brief welcome and a recap of yesterday's sessions, followed by the first panel, which is on Follow the Money, Financial Sector Corruption in PNG. Followed by panel 2, Dangerous Information, Whistleblowing and Investigative Journalism. And the final panel for the day, Passing the Torch, Generational Conversation on Integrity. So on behalf of Transparency International PNG, I welcome you all to day 2 of the first National Integrity Summit. To our audience online, thank you again for taking the time to also be present for this session. I also take this time to welcome and acknowledge the presence of senior government representatives, integrity institutions, private sector, the media, and civil society. I acknowledge those online who have registered for the sessions, notably our partners in the region, in Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, and the United States. We also have those joining us from our sister chapters around the world via Zoom. As mentioned yesterday, the summit brings together 28 agencies and organizations that participated in the National Integrity System Assessment 2021. Anti-corruption experts, stakeholders of TIPNG, and other relevant bodies to discuss ways in which we can bridge the integrity gap. In terms of the recap of yesterday, we started with our opening session, and we heard from the deputy head of the delegation, EU delegation to PNG. The EU are providing technical assistance to ICAC. Progress will be taken on key anti-corruption laws on the part of the European Union, including the Freedom of Information legislation. The EU has also provided extensive support to the financial management and institutions of PNG. The EU stressed that recommendations made by the EU observation team during the 2017 general elections have not as yet been taken up, and implementation is lagging. The EU also reaffirmed their continued support to the anti-corruption space in PNG. In the opening session, we also launched the National Integrity System Assessment 2021. Key findings: PNG has sufficient laws for national integrity. However, there is a significant integrity gap across all pillars. The integrity gap is caused by a lack of implementation, and action must be taken by the whole of society, but it must be led and coordinated by our national leaders. We do have strengths that we must depend on to help us overcome our weaknesses, and we must all work together to rise above corruption. In acknowledging the launching of the report, Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Honorable James Marape, said that the report compels all of us to talk about how parts of our system measure against the integrity scale. He mentioned that it provides a baseline data, allowing us to measure our progress over time. He also focused on 5 key areas. Parliament must be transparent in all its dealings. The 2022 national general elections will be delivered next year. Government continues to embrace the freedom of the media. Government and PNG is a robust democracy, and media remains a fundamental part of that. In the next session of Parliament, the Prime Minister also mentioned that the government is looking at introducing a new bill called the Unexplained Wealth Bill. The Prime Minister also emphasized that we must rise above complacency and corruption. We then moved on to panel 1 of the day, and that panel was on prosecuting corruption, moderated by my colleague Yuambari. Our distinguished panelists were Mr. Matthew Damaru, Director of the National Fraud and Anti-Corruption Directorate, Ms. Josephine Pitmo, Deputy Secretary Administration of the Department of Justice and Attorney General, and Jerome Sesega, Director on the Board of Transparency International, PNG. So the National Fraud and Anti-Corruption Directorate told us a bit about the mandate of the Directorate. They are tasked with investigating fraud and corruption in the country. Mr. Damaru also mentioned that corruption in the past was very minimal, and dealing with it was with simple fraud cases such as false pretense. Now it has gone to its highest level in terms of the nature of the issues plus the complexity. So we need to take a step further from cooperation to coordination, was a key message that Mr. Damaru shared with us yesterday. There must be coordination in order to have success in fighting corruption. Agencies can try to fight corruption alone, but if there is no coordination or cooperation, there will be no success. Mr. Damaru also stressed that in the past, the fraud squad used to make a lot of noise in the media because they had a lot more resources and that it allowed them to carry out the investigations. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, their budget has been reduced significantly, and it has affected their functions. There is a need also for a bit more coordination and cooperative effort in the fight against corruption. Mr. Damaru also stressed that agencies want to protect their mandate and independence, but they do need to cooperate more with each other. There was a discussion also on the proceeds of crime during that panel session, and how do we deal with proceeds of crime. It was found that in the last few years, there's only been one success in recovering funds. Questions that were asked during the panel: what happens to all the money that has been misused or stolen? Are they being recovered? What do we do with the money that people have misused? Do they go to jail and come out free? In that panel session, there was a lot of discussion about what do we need to do to be able to look at obtaining the proceeds of crime from all of the different cases that have come to light in the last couple of years. That panel also stressed on the importance of codes of conduct and that there is some improvement that needs to be made in implementing these codes of conduct in the public service. The panel 2 and the last panel for yesterday focused on compliance and enforcement, the role of regulators. Again, a very interesting discussion that took place not just here in the room, but also online. Again, the moderator of the session was my colleague Yuambari, and our distinguished panelists for that session were Mr. Doveri Henao, Executive Director of Business Council of PNG, Mr. Clarence Hood, Managing Director of the Investment Promotion Authority, and Mr. Brian Lillywhite of the Internal Audit Division of the PNG Customs Service. So Doveri spoke on the panel for the importance, or stressed the importance of having regulations in place. In the first instance, a regulatory system is critical for commerce and business to thrive. He also mentioned that it was fundamental that there were transparent mechanisms and that they needed to be embraced by regulators. Mr. Doveri Henao also mentioned that we need to move into a system that is integrated and identifies who the trader is. Currently, that we are unable to do that, and he stressed that once we are able to identify the trader, there's a bit more transparency. We will be able to find out who is committing these crimes and who needs to be arrested. Mr. Hood spoke about from the perspective of the IPA. They believe that there's a lot of room for improvement and the need for collaboration. The IPA have already identified areas within the legislative framework that require improvement and will be working on this over the next couple of months. Agencies, Mr. Hood stressed, are adequately equipped. This is regulatory bodies to carry out their function of regulating. Most agencies do have powers to investigate and prosecute. They can also impose penalties. In the view of the IPA, they were independent enough. What Mr. Hood did stress also was that the issue with ensuring corrupt actors are penalized, there needs to be steps taken for the lack of prosecuting of corruption at the agency level. Mr. Lillywhite stressed the importance of the PNG Customs Service as a regulator and wanted to correct some of the misconceptions that people have about customs. So Mr. Lillywhite stressed that one of the biggest misconceptions is that customs is the sole authority on regulating imports and exports of goods because they are the most visible. But he stressed that PNG Customs, however, is not the sole regulator, that there are others that are part of this process, and that's something that he wanted to make sure people were aware of in his talk yesterday. Customs do not have the authority or legal mandate to grant tax exemptions. In addition, at the airport, the responsible authority is immigration. So these are some of the key points that Mr. Lillywhite wanted to stress during the panel discussion yesterday. Going forward, again, he reiterated that there is a need to be more cohesive with other agencies and the need to be sharing a lot more information. And so the most common theme found across all our panels was the need for cooperation and collaboration between agencies and organizations. It's important to note also that the discussions throughout the day yesterday, that one of the key things that came out is that we do have adequate laws. The biggest challenge was the implementation of existing laws and policies. So today, TIPNG brings to you 3 panel sessions that will help us look further into, number 1, the financial sector, Number 2, dangerous information, whistleblowing and investigative journalism. And number 3, closing off our summit with a generational conversation on integrity. So we thank our online Zoom participants as well for your commitment and your time, and we look forward to receiving your questions and comments. Before I end, it would only be fitting that I share a quote from our founding chair, the late Sir Anthony Siaguru, in an article of June 1997. He states, "This is a battle that Papua New Guineans must engage themselves. This is their country, and they are the ones who ought to sort it out. It is critical for PNG to build a coalition of concerned people who work to change the culture that allows businesses to secure questionable deals with the government and vice versa. And although the fight against corruption is serious, difficult, and often dangerous task, it is one that must be done." Thank you. So I will now invite the moderator for the first panel session up for this morning. I'd like to invite to the stage Mr. Martin Brash, and as he makes his way up, I will give you a brief introduction of Mr. Brash. So Martin is the chair of the Tanorama Consulting Network. He has provided advisory services to the government of PNG, international governments, and major development partners with a specialization in governance and stakeholder engagement, including key inputs to the major governance initiatives, such as PNG's application to the Open Government Partnership and the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. He has designed and led facilitation for various multi-stakeholder agreement processes, strategy and policy design sessions, and public feedback forms. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Martin Brash up to the stage.
Thank you, Ariane. Morning, everyone. Yes, as Ariane said, Martin is my name, and I will moderate for the 3 panel sessions today. Let me also say that I'm a willing volunteer to the important initiatives that Transparency International is conducting in PNG, and looking forward to supporting your continued work. Acknowledgement as well to the European Union for their support for this important initiative. And thank you to the small but important group that are gathered here and nicely socially distanced. I remind you of those COVID-19 protocols again. Thanks for spreading yourselves apart and using your masks, and no chewing buai under those masks, please. Look, I know some of you will have questions you might want to ask, and that goes for the audience and those online as well. If you do have a question, write down a note and capture the attention of a Transparency International staff member, and they will feed the questions into the panel session. If we have time, we'll get to those questions. Now, for those of you online, thanks so much for joining us. Again, I reiterate our hashtags for the event, hashtag Together We Rise Above Corruption, and hashtag PNG Integrity. Likewise, if you're sending through questions, we'll see if we have time to address those. Now, today's theme, before I introduce our first panel, but this session's theme, I should say, is a discussion towards the objective of preventing corruption. And its focus is on following the money. It's about financial sector and corruption in PNG. really we'll be talking a lot about money laundering in this context. And importantly, we'll hear from experts in this field. What is money laundering? How does it work? What's happening about it at the moment? And what more do we need to do? Those will be the areas that the discussion aims to move into. So I'd like to invite the panel members on board, on stage, I should say. Thank you. First of all, Mr. Benny Popoitai, Deputy Governor of the Bank of PNG. Mr. Popoitai was appointed Deputy Governor and to the board of the Bank of PNG since November 2000. Extensive experience in this field. He is chairman of the Microfinance Expansion Project, and he's also president of the PNG Institute of Directors. Please welcome Mr. Popoitai. Joining the panel is Ms. Nuni Kulu, President of the Business Council of PNG. She is currently the BSP Digital General Manager, and previously she was Regional Manager for the Southern Region at the Bank of South Pacific. Welcome, Ms. Kulu. Technology willing, we will also be joined by Fabrizio Fioroni. He comes from the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism and financing of terrorism, or he's the advisor of counter-terrorism and financing of terrorism with the UN Office of Drugs and Crime based in Thailand. Welcome, Fabrizio. So just a bit more background about him. He has worked throughout Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands through a global program working against money laundering, proceeds of crimes, and the financing of terrorism. Prior to joining the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, Fabrizio was an officer with the Financial Crimes Unit of Interpol. And in this capacity, he provided technical assistance and investigative support to Interpol members in Asia and the Pacific on matters relating to money laundering, financing of terrorism, and criminal prosecution. I'm sure you'll agree we have an extremely experienced panel, which will take our conversation to understanding what it is, knowing what we're doing about it globally and in PNG, and thinking about what more needs to be done. So let's get started. Very odd to be a long way away from the people you're talking to, but that is the new normal. Look, I think the first thing we want to do is just be clear what we're talking about. So I'd like to pose the first question to Fabrizio online, and it's the fundamental question: what is money laundering? Can you describe that for us, Fabrizio?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for this question, and thank you for inviting me to this very important summit. Good morning, first of all, to everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Being in this new normal situation is a little bit difficult, and the only privilege for me now is the fact that I don't have to wear a mask. Otherwise, I would have preferred really to be there physically. So what is money laundering? Money laundering is really an insidious crime because it has harmful effects on economies and societies as a whole. With this criminal conduct, basically, the perpetrators, they manage to launder the illegal proceeds that they have generated through other crimes. If you think, for example, about corruption, the perpetrators need to launder the illegal proceeds because in this way they can disguise the illicit origin of the crime, and they can benefit and enjoy the luxury lifestyle that they achieve through the use of that illegal proceeds. It is an insidious crime, as I said before, because it exposes many sectors of each country or jurisdictions. One of the major sectors which is usually exposed to risks for money laundering is the financial sector, which is vital for the economy of each country. So you understand that if that sector is affected by criminal activities, obviously that poses a major risk. So this is what money laundering is the attempt, and sometimes unfortunately in a successful way, to disguise the illicit origin of illegal proceeds, which should actually are most of the time stolen from societies.
Thanks so much. So clearly from your background and what you've said, money laundering is transnational, and I'd like to get an input here from Benny Popoitai, who is the director of the Financial Analysis and Supervision Unit at the Bank of PNG, FASU as we call it for short. And I'd like to hear more about that and the link to money laundering and definition as described by Fabrizio.
Good morning. Good morning, Fabrizio. A good definition of money laundering. Yes, within Papua New Guinea, the context is the same as around the world. The standards, the definition is, put it in a simpler way, is that ill-gotten money, stolen money, or money gotten from means that are not acceptable to society, is then used, the intent of to use that money is to clean it. Criminals clean it by placing the money as deposits in the banking and financial system. That's the normal process of laundering. Laundering, as we know, is like washing, cleaning. So they launder the money by placing it in a financial institution as deposits, or they get other people to do it for them, disguising. And once it's in there, it is in the financial system, it is washed already, it's laundered already. So criminals do it because they know how to do it. They have developed a system to launder the money. The intent of this process is to recycle so that it can become normal money, that no one can be able to trace it back and say you got it from an illegal means and you place it in a financial system. The way it's done is through some process. It's called, sometimes you layering. It's a process of going in small amounts to place it in the financial system, or sometimes you you get it into the financial system and then use that money to purchase assets, either physical or financial assets. Normally, physical assets are high value assets. The intent is not to put it in there, it's for it to recycle, and then it comes back to the person who actually owned the money, the criminal himself or herself. Anyway, so this is a problem throughout the world. We are no exception. And so the intent of this, the theme of this summit is rightfully something that the Papua New Guineans should discuss and be wary of, because it is a way that is used to affect the government budget system. We talk about we have lots of money, but we don't see any development as a result of that. Well, in our assessment of risks in this country, we meaning FASU and the National Coordinating Committee, 18 of us. FASU is a coordinating agency within the National Coordinating Committee. So we did a survey of risks. Where are the major risks on money laundering coming from? Government budget system is high. And so we come up with a strategy to combat this. So the National Coordinating Committee is a committee of the National Executive Council. We have about 22 members and a few observers. Our task is to look at government departments, agencies, including non-government agencies, to see if we can have a coordinated effort to be able to identify and perhaps eliminate the risks of money laundering within government and then within the country too. The first in the forefront are the financial institutions, the banks, finance companies, savings and loans, and then there are others that deal with cash, including accountants, lawyers, and real estate agents, car dealers. So those who deal with significant amounts of cash, we are interested. In fact, we have registered nearly all of them that we know of. These companies deal with, like Ella Motors or Morocco Motors, sometimes individuals go in significant amount of cash and pay cash. So what we ask of them is that they identify who the customer is, know their customer, and get some background information, what their sources of income is, their main business activity, so that they can then report if the amount of money they use is beyond their means, to be able to raise something like suspicious matter report to FASU. And that's the basis we do our investigations.
Thanks.
Sorry.
I want to come back to some more details on how you're identifying and addressing money laundering, but I just go back to Fabrizio at the moment to understand a bit more about the link between how it occurs in the country and what's happening internationally, and how the international actors might be able to support or strengthen local action around money laundering.
Yeah, okay. In terms of international community, we have to go back since the adoption of the UN Convention against illicit traffic of narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. At that time, there was at the end of the 80s, the international community started looking at illegal proceeds coming from drugs trafficking. That was when there has been a major attention to the first adoption of, let's say, the meaning of money laundering. Then those concepts have been broadened to a major list of serious crimes, to include, obviously, also corruption, through other UN resolutions and UN conventions. The major being the UN Convention against transnational organized crime and the UN Convention against corruption. So all those documents or that level of policies gave the birth of the Financial Action Task Force that was established at the end of the 80s, right when the international community was looking at money laundering from drugs trafficking. Then the Financial Action Task Force has become the international standard, the setter of the international standards on money laundering, for which now we see that most of countries and jurisdictions are establishing legislations, and also the financial intelligence unit like FASU and PNG, based on those international standards. The United Nations, we are observers of the Financial Action Task Force, and also at the regional bodies which constitute the Financial Action Task Force. One of which is the Asia-Pacific Group on Money Laundering, of which Papua New Guinea is a member. And all this framework foresee that there is also a process for establishing how good countries are doing in terms of compliance with those standards, and how good the same countries are effectively implementing their own legislations and policies. So at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, also with the support with other organizations, other international organizations and bodies, including the EU delegation and also the EU delegation in PNG, we provide technical assistance to our member states, aiming at achieve a good level of compliance and effectiveness in regards to those standards. Obviously, money laundering, as we said so far, is a transnational crime, and it is not enough to have just one country being able to detect and investigate and prosecute this crime. Obviously, there is a need for a standardized approach against this crime, because sometimes you have the crime that generates the legal proceeds, let's say, for example, in Papua New Guinea, but then the related proceeds, the money and assets, move in a completely different way. So that involves third countries which don't see the predicate offense occurring. So we need to have a system at regional and global level that is capable and ready to address money laundering even when the predicate offenses occur in other countries. So there is a lot of effort from the international community which is being placed in addressing the money laundering so far. And the way forward is probably still a bit long, but we see that there are tangible successes. For example, we see that when countries are assessed against the compliance and effectiveness of the anti-money laundering systems, we see that the technical assistance provided by international organizations like ourselves, but not just us, because there are other actors obviously out there which are able to assist. We see that there are some improvements, there are tangible improvements, and this is a very, very encouraging result.
Thanks. I note that from your title and role of your office and some of the things you've said, there's an emphasis on drugs and counter-terrorism being the driver of some of these or money laundering efforts. But what's the case in PNG? I mean, are we talking about these insidious, ill-gotten gains from drugs or for use in anti-terrorism, or what is the real driver? Where's this money being stolen from, and what it's about. I'd like to hear more about that. Do you have any insight on that, Mr. Popoitai, again?
Thank you. We have, I think corruption is the biggest threat. Yes, they use the system we have to, and what we have now, we came into existence in 2016 when the law on money laundering was passed in 2015. It took us some time to be ready to roll out the requirements of the law, implement the law from 2016. This is only our 40th, going 50th now.
Sorry, just specifically that law being, can you describe the act or what it's called?
The law was intended, is basically primary objective was to protect the integrity of the financial system. As money laundering doesn't happen through any other way, it goes through the financial system, as I said earlier, to have it laundered so it doesn't raise suspicion when it is transferred elsewhere. So in our legislation, we also expanded that law to include other institutions, other companies like, as I said, the lawyers and accountants. They open accounts for their clients as trust accounts. Now, before you open a trust account, you must know your client as somebody who's providing service for the public. Likewise, motor car dealers, real estate agents, those are now subjected to our reporting requirements. For instance, a lawyer cannot go and open an account with BSP if they don't have a registration with us. So then that gives us ability to first we can go and do an on-site audit on the lawyers and accountants as well as real estate and others. So if, for instance, they do not report anything to us, or they report many incidents of suspicious matters, then we go on site to check what they do in their office. Are they doing like customer due diligence before they unload their clients? If so, do they talk to them about the need for them to report? So with the commercial banks, we receive online reports daily, weekly. And so that gives us some visibility on what is happening.
So just to be clear, you're saying, though, that the money that's being laundered in PNG through corruption, so stealing of government or public funds, and then taking it, trying to legitimize it through the system, is that the number one money laundering scam in PNG?
There are others also. Transfer pricing, trade, underpricing, or overpricing for exports. Those are challenges we have. It's not only through the banking system, through our trade system that we have. For instance, a logging company may overprice the logs or underprice the logs because somebody else is out there, maybe a parent company is taking it as a real discount and then selling it for a major profit. So, but the primary intent is to protect what's here. And then we have like Fabrizio said, we have relationship MOUs with other FIUs, financial intelligence units around the world. At the moment, we can have access to about 170 FIUs. So if they escape here, we can be able to raise the, contact the FIU in maybe, let's say, China, and ask them to provide some background information on this company or related companies that our PNG companies are exporting to. That we can do. Through the membership of EGMON. EGMON is the highest group of financial intelligence units around the world. You become EGMON member and they ask you for information. You have to give that information, I think, within 24 hours or 48 hours. So the money is not only laundered through the banks or finance institutions. There are other ways that can be done. And therefore, yesterday some people called for cooperation within the law enforcement agencies in PNG, because I'm no expert in forestry. I am no expert in fisheries. So these are the people who are responsible for ensuring compliance with the laws of forestry or fishery sectors. So they have to step up and provide the information. So it's a challenge because in PNG we find it so difficult to do MOUs with many government agencies and departments. I don't know for reasons, I don't understand why. Because information, in my view, the information sharing within this country is important for us to do our jobs effectively. Yes, you have collaboration, you come to meetings like this, and you talk, we talk. But if we cannot be able to freely share information, then our jobs are made more difficult. Because I have to go to his office and ask for information when I shouldn't. I just ask for him for the information and he'll provide me. This is the greatest challenge we have in this country. Like for MOUs, Memorandums of Understanding, we have 14 MOUs, maybe 15 in PNG, and we have about 17 with international FIUs. You can see that it's so difficult to get around ourselves when globally there are people willing to exchange information through Memorandum of Understanding. So the exchange of information is the critical factor in my view in ensuring greater cooperation. And once we share information, our jobs are made a lot easier.
Thanks. I want to get from all three of you in different ways the scale of this issue. I mean, how much money, for example, is being, and the audience have asked this question, we hear about money going offshore. What's the scale of that problem? We hear that corruption is an issue that drives a lot of these money laundering efforts. How much money are we talking about? So from your own perspectives, can you give a sense of scale? Any of you have some feedback on that? What's the size of this problem? Any figures from you, Fabrizio?
Okay, figures are obviously difficult to give because being a criminal activity, so it's not transparent and we don't have official statistics. But at global level, it is estimated that around 3% of gross domestic GDP is available for money laundering. So let's say that that's the amount that at global level we can estimate as being available for criminals after they have committed their crimes. In terms of Papua New Guinea, this is difficult to establish, but we see for example, if we examine the forestry sector that was mentioned by Mr. Benny a few moments ago, if you analyze the trade statistics, you can see that there is a huge gap between what are the figures in Papua New Guinea and what are the figures declared in the importing countries. So basically what transpires is that the illicit financial flows connected to illegality within the forestry sector in PNG can easily be estimated to be at 100% of the value of the timber. So it means that basically you are losing half of the value of the timber that is being exported, because the importing countries are telling us a completely different story to what transpires from what is declared in Papua New Guinea. And this is also a little bit confirmed from what we probably have seen in the news recently from the Internal Revenue Commission of Papua New Guinea, when the Commissioner General had publicly stated that there is a major issue with some of the logging companies which are misusing transfer pricing for committing tax crimes, and so giving the rise of illicit financial flows into that sector, which I can really estimate based on trade data that it's the illicit financial flows, I can say that are around 100% of the value which is declared in Papua New Guinea. So you can imagine that we're talking about very important figures. And then there are obviously other crimes, major crimes. We have seen the recent past that Papua New Guinea, like other Pacific islands, has become a transit point for major transnational organized crime groups who are trafficking with illicit drugs. And you can imagine that part of the illicit financial flows linked to that criminal activity can also be laundered partially in Papua New Guinea as well, because you can imagine that there must be some kind of network who is assisting that typology of transnational organized crime.
Very hard to hear that. Anything from the PNG side?
I agree with Fabrizio's comment on money laundered from the industry, forestry, for instance. Just a little bit of background. We know of what Commissioner General said about forestry sector. Half of them been in existence for 30 odd years and declaring losses every year. How could a company be surviving in this kind of scenario? Being operational but still making losses every year. FASU works closely with the IRC commissioner. In fact, for all the intelligence products that we disseminated to the law enforcement agencies in this country, we have greater visibility with what the IRC is doing with the information we are sending them. Remember, we are an intelligence unit. We have no powers to investigate. We just follow the money within the banks and institutions here in this country. And once we come across something that we consider as suspicious, we get the report, we do our analysis, and then we think that this is something that IRC should get. Then we send that report, that file to IRC. If we know that this is for ombudsman, we shall send that file to the ombudsman, to customs. We have no power of investigation and prosecution. So to date, we have sent about 10,000 files to different law enforcement agencies in this up to now. So this is our challenge, that when they get the information, is there any agency to follow up? Because what we send them is enough for them to take that information to court. So UNODC has been very helpful with us in improving our data analysis, our database. So we have sufficient information to be able to give anyone enough information for them to go and prosecute. So
Thanks.
the cooperation is what is needed. The drive to do what you must do for the benefit of our country. I have heard of institutions that the little guy down the hierarchy, he prepares a file for someone to be taken to court. Yeah? When that happens, the possible victim, has a direct line to the decision maker. It's a challenge we have. So yesterday, I was listening to the discussions. We need to have kind of a survey to see those who have investigation and prosecution powers. In the last 10 years, how many people have they prosecuted? If no, you want to ask them, why? Is the industry or the business you are in so good that you cannot prosecute anyone? These are the questions we must challenge ourselves with. Like I said about the information we are sending to all the law enforcement agencies in this country, and we haven't seen any result of that. No one has come back and said, well, we need additional information to go after this group or this company or this man. No one.
Thank you. We've got a sense of what it is, how big it is globally in the PNG terms, and you're generating a lot of questions and interest from our online and live audiences here. I want to switch, though, and apologize to Nuni for only bringing her in, but I think it's important you've set the legal framework, operational issues on the line here. Noting that, Nuni, look, what is the impact of money laundering on the private sector? What does it mean for most of us who are out there in the private sector and society? What's money laundering causing?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. As expanded quite in detail, money laundering does have the potential devastating economic security and our social consequences. And this will harm, potentially harm the soundness of the country's financial sector. In adding on to that as well, it will potentially have adverse reputational, regulatory, and financial and legal risk for our financial institutions. So money laundering does affect the private sector in a myriad of ways. And just from a practitioner's perspective, I guess it does add to the cost of business. There are solutions required to meet these regulatory obligations. So those costs, that does cost the business in terms of time and money, both financial institutions and your designated non-financial business and professionals, such as Director has expanded on, your car dealerships, lawyers, accountants, and real estates are all required to monitor transactions and to identify money laundering. And they are all required to collect information about their customers based on their customer KYC procedures. And of course, in order to identify perhaps unusual or suspicious customer behavior. These obligations do require automated systems or solution, and that does add to the cost of doing business from the practitioner's perspective. No doubt there's ongoing customer due diligence reviews, and anytime there's a trigger event or alert that's been raised, then those reviews have to be done immediately. The other aspect as well is customers do not understand the reasons for these inquiries most of the time and into their financial affairs, and most of them are disgusted with or maybe suspicious of why businesses are asking for this kind of information. So that's the kind of impact we're seeing with the whole money laundering governance and management of it, and then also trying to manage the impact on customers within, particularly not just the financial industry, but across industries in terms of managing how we have to gauge this information and track and report this information to FASU.
So just with your role in the BSP, I mean, what's your visibility there? How strenuous is this effort to understand your customer and where their money is coming from?
Yeah. So despite those increased costs on business, not just BSP or all financial institutions, I'm sure, and the whole private industry, they do understand the reasons why the government has brought in these regulatory requirements, and no doubt fully support all government agencies to fight money laundering. Being in the financial sector, we are complying with all the AML requirements. There are new requirements that do pop in since the Act came out in 2015. The application and our compliance are around areas such as continuously reviewing and changing our customer acceptance procedures. We continuously add on additional KYC sort of information, particularly for opening up accounts, not just personal accounts, and business and corporate accounts as well. And while we have those additional stringent sort of requirements that come in with, especially at that account onboarding perspective, we're also very mindful about also encouraging and driving the government's financial inclusion sort of impetus on that one. We continue to encourage that, but we do have to be compliant. We're also taking digital initiatives to collect additional information and conducting additional customer due diligence as per required. Implementing automated transaction monitoring systems and solutions as well is a continuous sort of area of efficiency and how we can best manage our reporting. Training of our staff and creating awareness on money laundering, even from the bank's perspective, it is a compulsory training that has to be done and conducted annually, and we have AML training that every officer from the group CEO right down to the security guards have to complete an online Toms and Reuters training as well, and other training that has to be done. So we do take it very seriously in terms of our application. And of course, creating public awareness on money laundering is important. It's something that needs to be done not only by the banks, but all stakeholders, and that's advertising on our advertisements or digital platforms that go out in terms of talking and creating awareness about what money laundering is.
So at the moment, someone comes in with hundreds of thousands in cash. They're required to answer a lot of questions, give information on where that money comes from. Is that right?
Yes. I think the assessment realistically is looking at who the customer is, what's their general business about accessing funds, whether be it salary sourced or other. If it's business, what type of business is this? What's the annual sort of activity of the business? Is the source of funds in line with the activity of the business? Is the amount that's being presented in line with the type of cash flow or invoicing or receipting that the business would normally cater for? And these are the sort of questions that our officers and trained officers, particularly at the branch, are expected to ask, and they're expected to collate. And anything that's outside of the norm does require a reporting process that needs to take place, a suspicious matter report, or a flagging that needs to be reviewed as to the nature of, deemed suspicious. Yeah.
So you start asking me the questions and I just take my cash and go back home then? Or is it too late? You got a file on me already?
We do have a file because your bank account is still with us. The bank undergoes, it does a risk classification of all our accounts, and that's a requirement. And so there are risk categories placed on all customers within our banking system. And that prompts the type of due diligence required if the customer is presented at the counter. And of course, fully, comprehensively need to go through that process. And we have a fully fledged strategic business unit that solely focuses on compliance, particularly AML.
So going back to business more generally, I mean, what do you tell your members? What is it that they can do about, well, your association and its members can do about this? I mean, it's one thing for financial sector to ask a lot of questions, but are there any broader strategies that business is promoting to try and help tackle this issue with government?
Yeah, I think, yeah. So I do want to just expand a little bit on that. While we do a lot of work in identifying suspicious activity, and we've trained our staff to look for those types of activity, banks are required to also, I guess, we look at transactions and look at against, there are sanction lists that we have to apply in terms of gauging what is a suspicious activity. And I think we haven't touched much on this, but on the PEPs particularly, we do have to, we perhaps apply a more rigorous and an enhanced sort of customer due diligence when it comes to that process. We do maintain a PEP list, politically exposed people list, and then subject to the highest levels of scrutiny or even monitoring. But from a professional, looking at professional associations, in order to improve how money laundering is detected and to assist all the private sector in this regard, I guess we got some suggestions that we could better probably exchange information between government agencies and the private sector much more collaboratively. And FASU has already started this. It has started in 2020 by sending a PEP list to the banks, and this incorporates the PEP names of all banks, and so that's of great assistance. At the present time, banks are not told after an SMR is filed, and sometimes if an SMR leads to a charge on a customer, then we ask that banks should be informed. I guess other organizations could be informed as well so they can reconsider those relationship with their customers. We ask also that there's probably more consideration on information should be made available to the banks, particularly coming from the police or the IRC, for instance, after charges have been brought on individuals and corporates, particularly where it's financial or related crimes. And this will assist our customers, particularly in the risk rate of our customers. We do rely on a lot of information that is publicly available, but sometimes on the media and through our international screening list, but sometimes this information comes a bit delayed. And so it's really about getting accurate and timely information from our government agencies, and banks are able to also assist those government agencies, FASU particularly, and particularly where we have to constantly be reviewing the relationship with our customers after instances of that drawn to our attention.
So you're collecting information, you're reporting it up, it's being investigated, 10,000 files have crossed over, cases have been brought, anyone being caught out and punished? What's the strike rate on addressing the perpetrators?
The strike rate, as you say, is disappointing at this moment. Because a lot of effort has been put into making sure. So, for instance, BSP might have a problem with one client. The same client will have problem with all the other banks. The banks themselves don't know that they have gone to the other bank also. And so our database When the banks report, we will have those reports done and analyzed so that we have all the information that we need to do. Once our process of analysis spits out that this person or these transactions are suspicious, from a systemic point of view, it needs to be advanced to, for instance, Mr. Damaru and his team in fraud squad, and we do that. How they do, what they deal with the information, as the law says, there is a segregation, and the law was deliberate, that we do not do investigation for police or for customs or for IRC. We are an intelligence team, and our work is to provide the law enforcement agencies with the ammunition to do their jobs. So it was intended that we don't repeat or duplicate the law enforcement agencies' work. We could have easily done that, no problem, but we don't want to do that. We want to remain a intelligence team. FASU, like all other financial intelligence units around the world, I think New Zealand probably is the only one who does the prosecution and investigation and prosecution. So that would mean that we would duplicate police, IRC, and other people's work. Their respective legislation has empowered them to investigate and prosecute. We don't want to repeat what they're doing, and duplication is costly exercise.
Yes, so over to Mr. Damaru's underfunded unit to take care of. Huh? Mm-hmm. You were going to comment on that, Nuni?
No, I guess it was really just the cooperation that needs to happen across agencies really to look at those illicit funds flow. And it's not, as Director has alluded to, it's not just financial services providing information, it's both ways. And I hope this type of discussions and meeting would be about improving that collaborative sort of approach across private sector and agencies as well. I do agree that there should be a joint sort of public awareness by both sides, both the government agencies and probably private sector, and really to educate the public about what money laundering is, and really probably particularly explain how that impacts PNG and the practical examples, whether it's across industries, just to be able to draw that picture and people can start to understand and recognize what it looks like. It's probably, we can talk about it from a flow perspective, but the practical application of it that's endemic within jobs and lifestyle and within the communities probably needs to be portrayed in a much more clear manner publicly for that awareness to go through.
Right, I do want to touch more on or get your feedback as a group on some of these way forward strategies, but I've just been told that we can have an extra 10 minutes due to the slightly late start. So those of you who are following time carefully online will take an extra 10 minutes in this session. Look, and someone online is asking the question about new dimensions to money laundering, and specifically, are there risks with some of these emerging financial arrangements such as cryptocurrencies? Is this creating a new dimensional problem? I mean, how dynamic and changing is money laundering, noting Nuni's comments about the efforts people go to hide their illegally gotten gains?
Thank you. Maybe Fabrizio will add later. We, in the AML space, we are very much aware of the threat posed by cryptocurrencies. In fact, in our last meeting here, 2 weeks back, we endorse that work on amending the legislation, AML legislation, will need to proceed. In fact, the Bank of Papua New Guinea has come out in a public advertisement about the risks, and the bank is position on cryptocurrencies and service providers. And FATF, I know that has been looking at these cryptocurrencies and for some time, and have accepted that this is a vehicle for money laundering. And so the new legislation we are looking at is to amend the AML legislation and have the service providers for cryptocurrencies to become more accountable. So it's being worked on now with our lawyers at the Auditor General's, Attorney General's office, and IPA and all the National Coordinating Committee members have thrown their support behind that. So yes, if no one is accountable, everything goes that direction. So we are very much aware of the risks that are posed by cryptocurrencies, and we're hopeful that before the end of the year we will have the AML legislation amended.
Fabrizio, any advice around that question as well?
Yes, the major issue with cryptocurrencies is that, and the service providers, that they are not fully regulated yet in all jurisdictions and countries. And we have seen in other regions that during the spread of COVID-19, where specific measures have been put in place restricting the movement of people, there has been a reduced use of transferring cash coming from major criminal activities. And we have seen the use of cryptocurrencies instead arising. So you can imagine that probably that would be the future for criminal organization once they understand how these can provide opportunity. Because criminals usually they explore new opportunities. Talking still about COVID, we have seen how criminals have been adopting new methodologies of frauds. So the issue here is that criminals sometimes they move at a major speed if compared to national authorities or jurisdictions in total. Because you need to amend legislation, which is a long process. You need to align different agencies to fully understand or work on the same page when addressing this new technology and this new field. So it is still a complex issue, but the major development that countries should look for are regulating those sectors.
I was going to add a comment. I think the regulation component is critical. I think even from the bank's perspective, there was some notice that went out that we did stop based on the back of what the BPNG's advice had gone out around cryptocurrency and the risks around that. But we did have to intervene to stop card transactions that were used to trade or purchase cryptocurrency. And I think it does come back to that expectation that banks are to report on any or all suspicious transactions on our customers. If we don't have the capability to validate who the source of funds or who the sender is, who's sending the funds, particularly now when we're talking technology that's going to bring in funds from cross-border or going to bring it via a wallet and a digital value, it does present a lot of challenge for financial institutions to be able to validate who has sent those funds, what the source of funds is for, and its purpose and how that funds has come about. So It is definitely a very important area, and the notes taken that definitely an avenue for money laundering is something that we would have to work together with regulators to make sure that's properly governed.
So from what you've been saying, you've been talking about the kind of some of the priority areas for action. One of them about keeping that regulation on its toes through relevant amendments and updates. You spoke a bit about awareness and training as to get people to understand what money laundering is and the value of discussions like this towards that. So, you know, just to close off our discussion, I'm interested from all three of you where you think the key priorities are to help PNG address this money laundering issue.
Yeah, I probably just start off. I go back to that point. It is the responsibility of all stakeholders, and I think when I was talking to you about his description of this topic around the dribs and drabs, and I said it is really about getting all our stakeholders, both the government agencies and the private sector, to really take the responsibility of looking after our economy. I think the mindset of having urgency, and it is an urgent task for all of us to work more comprehensively. We have to work together, and at the end of the day, it's the issue around our country's national integrity. So it is about these types of session, but more conversations and maybe more alignment with what our regulators are telling us so that we could all get ourselves aligned on how best we can enforce and comply with the regulations around illicit funds flow within our country.
Maybe, Benny, I get your views on the priority focus areas.
Thank you. I have a lot of focus areas, but for immediately we will have our mutual evaluation next year. Mutual evaluation is a process where the FATF, Financial Action Task Force, as Fabrizio was talking about, through the Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering, they come on site and go through our legislation and see how we are, whether the things that we do here, compliance with law and compliance with the global standards on anti-money laundering and countering terrorist financing. They come in, I think, in 2023, 24. We were supposed to be assessed this year, but because of the upcoming elections, we asked Asia Pacific Group that we need to have our assessment done after the elections. Because before the elections and straight after the elections, our decision makers, especially the politicians, will not have time to talk to them. So a bit of background, we became member of the Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering in 2008. When they came on site, none of us or none of the PNG didn't have the framework to be able to safeguard our country from abuse by money laundering and terrorist financing people. So they told us that we will be grey listed if we don't. They did a desk assessment in 2012, put us down to the grey list. And so they gave us 18 months in 2014 and 2013 and 2014 to come out, to prove to the FATF and the Asia Pacific Group on Money Laundering that we have done enough to bring ourselves up to compliance status. We did in 2015, the legislations were passed. About 6 legislations were passed and some amendments to existing law, including the Proceeds of Crime Act. So that assessment is done every 10 years. And so that is the risk we might, if we don't do anything like prosecute anyone. What the heck do we need the law for? So we must be seen to be enforcing law in this country. It's not for decoration, sorry. Time for us to show cause. And this is the problem, the challenge I said. It's the biggest risk for this country. We might go straight down the gray list. In some circles, I have had politicians say that the Rousing Money Laundering Act amended and allow us to do what we want, that kind of language. Because if you amend it and allow certain gaps, they're not going to come and do a mutual evaluation and decide on our status. We are going down the gray list. Because the law we had now is standard around the world. What happened was that when we were drafting the law, we had to go to any country that Asia Pacific Group meet to discuss and defend what we are drafting now. It took us like 18 months or so to do it. And that's the risk we have if somehow the legislation is amended. We go down the gray list. What does that mean? The ability for us to attract investments, good investments, will be tarnished. Project finance loans will have a higher interest rate. Perhaps many countries will refrain from doing business with us. Not only countries, but companies who have a high credit rating or risk management levels. They will want to shy away from PNG. So the risk is quite high for PNG as a country.
Thank you. You opened the discussion. Fabrizio, last word from you about where you think some priority action should be for PNG.
Yes, what I see that is needed for PNG is serious commitment from top management of all the agencies that comprise the National Coordinating Committee on Anti-Money Laundering. Because we see that from the government approach, there is such commitment, because we see that also the National Executive Council established such an interagency coordinating body, not the National Coordinating Committee. But then I don't see this translated into the reactions from the agencies, all the agencies that constitute this body. So there is still a lack of an institutionalized approach against money laundering within those agencies. And this is needed. I think this is why you don't see major prosecution yet, because there is not an institutionalized approach to the seriousness and the problems of money laundering. And each of those agencies also should bear in mind that they are at risk of internal corruption, so that's something that should be addressed, because there cannot be a functional anti-money laundering system if there is internal corruption within the key agencies. And then another aspect that should be prioritized is the strengthening of the public and private partnership, and where this could be possible to include also the no-profit sector, because we see that no-profit organizations are vital also to raise the issue of money laundering and related crimes, including corruption.
Thank you so much. Look, we've run out of time, and I'll just summarize, but it is a challenging one to summarize. There's my notes all over the place, so let's have a look at this. We hear from our panelists that money laundering is insidious, it's ill-gotten, and this description explains really how bad it is for our society. It's well understood that if we address money laundering to a greater degree, we go a long way towards our objective, which also applies to this session, on preventing corruption. So we hear PNG has taken some positive moves. an anti-money laundering law is in place, a coordinating committee, and an agency that focuses on assessing the situation and collecting data. We have good connections with an organized international community who work on this globally. And we see that they are promoting standards against which they expect countries to operate. We hear of one of the main risks of PNG dropping down that accreditation list into the grey list. I guess it drops to blacklist after that. And so international support to help us move up from the grey list and reflect that we're actively pursuing anti-money laundering efforts is a necessary target for us. Now, we hear also about the challenges, though, in money laundering. So we know that we're working against people who are actively hiding information, and we hear that our private sector, particularly the main banks, are cooperating to collect that information where they can. But we also know people are taking new and sophisticated ways to get around the scrutiny, including some discussion around emerging themes like cryptocurrency and new technologies. So the other issues that were raised were about the challenges in coordinating. We're very fragmented, large number of organizations in PNG, each with different roles, and how do we work across the chain from investigating and from analysis of the situation, identifying where the perpetrators are, into investigation and prosecution. And just like we hear from the National Integrity Assessment report, we appear to have a good law in place and some good policies in place, but again, when it comes down to practice, we're letting ourselves down. Different issues, lack of funding, confused responsibilities, and most important to highlight, the lack of prosecution. Disappointing was the term that Benny used to describe the success rate. Sounds like my rugby team. So what we know is that against these problems and this capacity and lack of financing, we have some ideas about the way forward, and that is the need to consistently work together to update the regulation, the importance of awareness and training, and I like the last point you brought in about the role civil society can play by asking more questions and getting more involved in the discussions, and that was also the advice from Nuni about focusing on increasing that discussion. The more people watching, the harder it is to hide. And if we fail to do this, we'll continue to suffer the effects of money laundering, which have increased the cost of business, which have helped promote institutional corruption, and which detract investors from coming into PNG. And in total, no doubt all of that impacts on our poor record of service delivery, which impacts the person on the ground as well. So at the moment, I run a small competition about quote of the day. Goes to Benny today. The quote of the day. He said, "If we don't prosecute anyone, what the hell is the law for?" Anyway, we'll see if someone else gets that ahead of you. So look, thank all our panelists, please. Fabrizio over in Thailand, thank you so much for your participation. Nuni, thanks so much for bringing the out-of-government insight that, again, is essential as a partnership to address this problem. Appreciate your advice today. And Benny, you hold the title of Quote of the Day. Thanks for your input today. Appreciate it. Bear with us online. We have the launching of a video before we break for morning tea, and we'll look forward to the launch. So over to the Executive Director.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Martin, for that. So we're going to make a slight change in the program due to our issues with timing, and we're going to move the launch of the iRate Awards to just before lunch. But for now, thank you to the panel and thank you to the moderator, Mr. Martin Brash, for this very insightful discussion on anti-money laundering. And I'm sure a lot of us have written down a few things that we need to do in the next couple of months to make sure that we are doing what we can to protect the economy of Papua New Guinea. So thank you. And we'll now break for morning tea. And to our Zoom participants, we aim to be back for panel number 2 at 11 a.m. Thank you.